the system in the Bible is called Babylon, and you'll read it in Revelation 18 and also in Daniel 2. So Daniel is a story of how a small version of mankind came out of Babylon. It's a tip. It's a method, like it's a story, a small version of what we need to do now, because it's the same thing over and over. It's just, there's nothing new under the sun. So what happened there was he invoked what were called watchers. So now that leads, what are the watchers? And then, so you go down these rabbit holes, okay, well, let's find out what these watchers are. And so then I would just try this stuff. I had a vague belief in angels, but my belief in angels changed because of their reaction to it. Because I just wrote it in there, I'm going to say watchers. Sounds like a cool thing to do. While the reaction was swift, and I went, okay, there's more to this watchers thing than even I understand, because, I'm writing to people like at the UN and monarchs, etc., who there is no apparent oversight. You get what I'm saying? There's no apparent upper jurisdiction. This is like the top of the world. And when I write them and I start talking about archangels, the reaction was very swift, where within a couple of days, a police officer is phoning me and telling me not to show up in court.
Right.
And I went, that is, somebody's terrified of this watchers thing. What is it?
Yeah.
You see, so that's how we did it. It was more like, I'll try that, and I have a vague belief in it. But when you see the reaction, we're like, okay, that they're not off in some heavenly realm. They're imminent.
Yeah.
Like something is right here, right now, watching, and they know it. I didn't know it until I saw what they did, and now I know it.
Yeah.
You see, that's almost everything I did was like that. And
so we could go so far as to say that, the Queen of England and people of her sort of knowledge about what's going on at the top swears an oath on the Bible, and she knows that there are spiritual forces that are looking over, that could come in and actually implicate themselves into what's going on in the world if certain principles are not followed.
Exactly. But they've set it up in a way to disguise that, like more like trying to make it disappear, and then they put layers in order to make you think that this is how it works down here, and you're not even aware of this, let alone operate in it.
Right. And it's kind of put out there, all this spiritual talk is put out there. It's like mythology, it's like, it's airy fairy stuff, and it has no real bearing on life on the planet, especially in politics and especially in economics, right, on the planet. We think, well, that's got nothing to do with these forces. But what you're saying is you found out when you go up to the top, on top of the top are these forces, and they're kind of waiting to be activated by people who are awakening and invoking them, bringing them forward.
What you can tell is there's rules of engagement. And we have the biggest part in how those rules, which way things are going to go.
Right.
And once we state something, it's done. And at those levels, if you state something inside their court system, they just go like, well, rule against you.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And everybody keeps pounding on those walls, and it's not a judgment, because I did it too. I read Acts until I was, my eyes were bleeding. I'd stayed up, I was working during the day and staying up till 3 or 4 in the morning reading Acts, because I thought that's how you deal with the court. And I would read and put together arguments. And I would go in there with the, beautiful arguments. You could see them. They're like, whoa, rule against you. And I'm like, well, what's going on in here?
So what you're saying, you're basically saying you eventually found out how to bring the whole thing into play, whereby you realized your own personal power, what your personal rights are. It's kind of like going back to natural law, right? you're kind of invoking your natural rights, and you're speaking the right language, and you're making the right statements to invoke the whole system, the whole overseeing of the whole judicial process on the planet.
Yes.
Right.
And when you go into the Bible, like on the page 1, it says, God created Adam and Eve, and there's a story about that, and there's a lot to that, and but that the Creator breathed into this being, and he became a living soul, and then he gave them dominion. That's the contract, not rights. Dominion. And I was having a conversation with a guy yesterday, just texting, and how do I get my rights? I said, you don't have rights. You have dominion. Rights means that there is something that's above me, and
above you, having granted
you rights,
you
or I have to plead in order to lessen their, or temper their control. That's what a right is. So yeah, you're this, but can you please at least let me breathe and have a little bit of food and some space?
Yeah.
No, that's not what we have is dominion. We're supposed to be on top.
Right.
And so people need to understand that, read it, experience it, and that's how it is. These laws that they were talking about in the Declaration of Independence, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
They said it includes this, but it's actually more than that.
Yeah, and they understood that, and it was on those solid grounds, on that rock, that they made their declaration, right?
And they put their lives on the line, and I can't overemphasize that, because when you've been in the trenches, and I have, and I paid some dues. It's not pretty, and these guys went way further than I would have. Well, I don't know what I would have done, but that is a big commitment. Either this is going to work or I'm going to be hung.
Mm-hmm. And in a sense, we find ourselves in a similar position where it's not just knowledge that's required, it's action taken based on that knowledge, where we're standing for something, right? We're going to say, this, we don't want this, we want this in our society, we don't want this, and we're going to take action against this if you bring it here.
It's even deeper than that. It's more like we have, everything they're doing is on a claim. And I found out something about claims. So from their point of view, claim is the strongest word in law. So they just make claims, and the claims can be false. This is what you got to understand. This is why it doesn't make sense to us, some of these things, because it's not in our way of thinking. They have a different way of thinking. Mm-hmm. So a claim can be a false claim, and yet it will stand in law. It will stand until somebody comes with a higher claim.
Okay.
And so if you don't come with the higher claim in the right way, it's like everything's technical, then this claim stands. So everybody goes, yeah, well, Rome has everybody's souls. No, they don't. They claim they do. They don't actually have it, but they do because of the claim. But as soon as you come with a higher claim, no, you don't own my soul. Oh, and it's based on this. Done.
Right. Oh, it's like any law in society that people say, well, you have to pay taxes and you have to do this and you have to do that, until you say you don't, right? And then if you know the right way to proceed, and
Yeah, and you might have to take some flack. So you got to be willing to, stand on that, because they're going to test you in some cases, like they did with me. The testing is getting less and less because we're actually gaining ground as a whole, and they're starting to, shrink back. But and now they're moving to drastic, let's just eliminate them. So that's where we're at, and it comes down to just stating your claim and standing on it.
Okay. I want you to talk a little bit, we talked about Canada and how it's, it's a corporation. That's what it is. Not even really a country, it's a corporation. What about the United States? Are they the same? Are they different in that regard?
The United States is a corporation, like the capitalized United States, but there is a United States that is the republic, and that's based on the Constitution. And those that go into the corporate courts with the Constitution, it's not valid there, and they're told so, and they kind of go into shock. But it's actually true. You can't bring in the Constitution in those courts in the way that you're trying to do it. They're not constitutional courts. They're corporate courts.
Corporate courts. So what you're saying is that the republic, based on the Constitution, has a higher jurisdiction than the United States all capital corporation. But if you go to court, you're in the corporate court, and you gotta do. And is that law merchant? Is that commercial?
That's commercial, and it's by agreement. So it's the same thing as if you work at Walmart and you've been working there for X period of time. So you go there, you put time in, you give up your freedom to go there, and they give you what's called money. If you decide one day, well, because I can have the pursuit of happiness, I would be happier on the beach because this Constitution says so. So you phone your boss and say, well, I'm not coming today because I'm pursuing happiness on the beach today. That wouldn't fly. The Constitution is irrelevant at Walmart in that sense. Yeah. So you got to understand that that's what's going on. You've agreed to this corporation called the United States, and yes, it is deceptive. But if you vote, your SSN number, your birth certificate, all are part of that corporation. So they are assuming that you're okay with this until you say otherwise in the proper way. Mm-hmm. And it's not easy to do. They really push against that.
So the republic is formed first, and then they bring in the corporation called the United States later in U.S. history?
Yeah, it came in later.
Do you have any, like, a brief history of that?
I don't have any dates on that offhand, but there are key things that happened that show this. So that there are people who teach this in the United States. I'm more the Canadian history because I had to deal with that. But it is definitely a corporation, and the courts are definitely corporate. There was one case in particular where they definitely moved away from the common law, and that was the Erie Railroad case, and that changed things forever, as far as them, how they operate. But one thing I'll tell you about the birth certificate, that's how they've turned you into a merchant. And so going back to the Lex Mercatoria is in the common law courts.
Yeah.
They could only use that when merchants were there. So they had to make sure that everybody that came in there was a merchant.
Gotcha.
That's how they did it. So they created this thing called a straw man and capitalized your name, turned you into a corporate, not you into a corporation, but they made a corporation that has a name like yours. Same thing they did with the countries. So the countries they're actually corporations. We're told they're countries, and they have Olympics every 4 years and to solidify that, and they have songs and they have flags and banners and all this stuff to constantly put that in your head. But countries don't really exist. And so that capitalized name is the corporation, and the number is your SSN number in the United States or your SIN number in Canada. That is your corporate number. And so the minute you try and get a driver's license, a bank account, credit card, mortgage, anything, first thing they ask for, the number, to make sure that you're a merchant.
And then, so everything proceeds with the law merchant. You're a merchant. Your dealings are on that level of jurisdiction, and we don't even realize it.
No.
And we wonder why we don't understand what happens in a court.
Exactly. So once I started to see, because I came through the hard way and I banged my head against this thing, I had all those questions like, why am I losing even though I'm winning? And once I went to a seminar on this, epiphany after epiphany. I like, there it is. There, that's why. And it just now I get it. I see what's going on because I had the context.
Yeah.
I had all the experiences of all these anomalies. Like, why is that happening? And it's consistently happening. Like once I saw that there was this other thing going on, now it's like obvious what's going on. So then I just started operating there. And again, still trial and error. But the first move that I made as a merchant, because now instead of fighting it, I went, okay, if I'm a merchant, here's my first move.
Let me act it like a proper merchant, knowing
in the
my
proper
rights,
way, knowing exactly how this works.
Yeah.
First move, judge runs out of the room. I went, okay. Now we're on to something.
Yeah.
And like I said, there was still a period of time, maybe a year, where they were still trying to, fight back. But after they held me for 60 days, at the end of that, that's the last time I was in court.
So why don't we end this segment? I want to hear about this time you spent in jail and kind of describe that situation and what came from that, how that moved you to the next step in your understanding of what's going on.
Well, like I said, I did some common law. I did a mixture of common law and law merchant. So I used what's called prerogative writs, and you need to look those up too. That's a key for anywhere where the common law is, and one of them in particular is called quo warranto, and it's a old common law writ. And what ends up happening is the queen becomes the nominal, or the king becomes the nominal plaintiff. So as the realm was going out, they had lords that were, kind of held small pockets of people, and taxes came through them and then back to the king. So it was a kind of a spread. But they didn't have the internet, and they didn't have planes, and they didn't have cars. So as the realm spread, anybody could really get up and say, well, I'm a lord, the king made me the lord, and now I'm blah, 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 blah. And, start collecting taxes, and nothing's going back to the king. Like, how would you know?
Right.
So there was a writ called quo warranto, which says by what authority, and if the person didn't prove it, then there was a problem, and it would go back to the king. So the king was actually a plaintiff on that thing, because it's possible that the king is not getting their cut from something that's untoward, right? So that writ is still alive, and so I would use that because the premise of it is, by what authority are you doing this? And you have to prove it. And it's a common law writ. You have to actually act on this, and you've sworn an oath back to what's her name there, and therefore this is all still available to me, and I want to know where your authority comes from specifically. And if you can't do it, then I'm going to assume you're operating in commerce, that this is a corporation, that I am correct. And therefore, if you enforce your laws, which I can prove they're repugnant to the common law, then you will owe me X amount of dollars for this, whatever it is. It's just a straight up deal.
Okay, so in particular to that situation you were in court, where you got sent to jail, can you tell me like what the fight was about and what ended up happening? The
fight was about driving without insurance.
Okay.
So in where I live, BC, they had what's called ICBC, and it's the government insurance for cars. So everybody has to do it. It's a law. As I was learning, and I had read that act many times, like I said, because that's what I did in the beginning. So I knew the act better than most police officers, and could get them all turned around, and they'd make phone calls, and then they'd come back. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I told you. So I knew the act really well, and inside the act, then they've changed it, but I was able to give what's called a commercial instrument to the finance minister, and it would be called taking financial responsibility in the driving context.
Okay.
And within the act, they were supposed to give me a card and a sticker for the inside of my windshield, so that police officers would go, carry on, you're good. So we did this. because we figured out what a commercial instrument is. We'd learned all that, because if you didn't know what it was, you'd be just like, well, that doesn't apply to me because I don't even know what that is. Well, we figured it out, and so we did this. And the ICBC refused to give us our card and our thing, and it's according to their act. And so then we went after the finance minister and said, you're the fiduciary on this, you're holding the instrument, you need to make ICBC give us our card and our sticker. We get letters from the Attorney General. You can't do that. You can't make Minister Taylor your fiduciary, and if you have a problem, you need to go to a court, and if you don't have a lawyer, here's 1-800 hire a lawyer. Same letter I get. I've had hundreds of them. So we just kept going through our commercial process. On the day of default, she steps down.
Okay, now by day of default, so explain how that was created.
So the process in commerce is a 3-step process. You state your claim, and then you give if they don't respond, then you give an opportunity to fix it. And then once that time period is passed, then there's a notice of default. It's all done outside the court system, just like Lex Mercatoria. It was not in the court. It was done fast. Judgments were like bing, 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 based on affidavits, and this is the truth. If you don't answer, this is what's happening, and we're taking your stuff.
And so you're doing this outside the courts, and you're doing that in correspondence with officials, and
yes, because
that's how you're proceeding.
Yes, because this is a commercial endeavor. I asked you if you had any proper authority to be in a government, and I know inside that they didn't. I know they don't have it, but I at least went through that process.
Right.
You didn't answer, therefore you are a corporation, therefore you're subject to commercial law. Here's my move.
Okay, so it was getting up to the default deadline.
Yeah, we sent the default. Mail was delivered, late morning. She's gone in the afternoon. And she was being groomed. You could see her. She was in the news and paper a lot to be the next premiers. Like, she was moving up the ladder.
And what would you say would be the reason that they didn't actually give you the sticker? And
well, if they give it to me, I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell Jeff, and I'm going to tell Bob, and everybody's going to be doing this.
Perfect. So she was told, well, you can't, by her higher up, she was told, you can't do this. So we never got a response from her directly. We went to ICBC, which is just down the road from where we are right here. There's a corporation there, big building. And so we went in there, because they're supposed to issue this thing, and they are part of the government. They were part of the government. I don't want to get into that story, but anyway, it's now a private corporation with one owner, and that is the government. So it's a different situation. It's not actually part of the government. It's a for-profit, so they don't have to publicly say how much money the thing is making, Okay.
all that stuff. So there's a million scams like that going on over here.
Yeah.
BC Hydro is another one. So they used to be crown corporations, but now they're private corporations with one shareholder. Yeah, so you can figure that out. And they did a bunch of stuff. But anyway, so we went to ICBC. We got some kind of manager, because we'd already written, and they said, well, come down for a meeting. So we go to this thing, and you have to sign in, and it's pretty closed. And we end up in this room that's kind of locked down, and there were some people sitting there pretending to be customers or whatever. They were there for some reason, and I looked at them, and I whispered to the guy. I went to the guys. Those are military type people. Like, they're here to listen or whatever. I don't know, whatever. But they're not. You can just tell they weren't what they portrayed themselves to be.
Yeah.
And so the lady comes out, and she looks at the paper, and she goes, "Yeah, Minister Taylor." And then her face starts going red, and she's just reading this, and then she's looking at us. We're staring at her the whole time. She's reading and then looking, and you could just see, oh no, they found it. You could just see it. Like, her body language is like, What are we going to do? This is correct.
Yeah.
She couldn't find anything wrong with it. We're going to have to have a meeting and we'll get back to you. Okay. That's what I thought. And so got a phone call the next day. Nope, not doing it. So we went after Minister Taylor. So that's how that came about. Okay. So Minister Taylor, it was Carol Taylor. We never heard from her at all. So the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, wrote on her behalf because that's how it works. So he's like a lawyer. He's a guy that doesn't get voted in. He's the actual one that sort of, Attorney Generals come and go, but he's the actual entity behind all that. So we kept getting those letters from him, and then when we just ignored them and did our process, she stepped down and left politics with no notice. And we saw this type of behavior over and over again because everybody says that, well, that's a coincidence. And we thought so at first too.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, we were going through just trying stuff. And was that a coincidence? Like same day? But after, 14 of these, you go, no, this isn't now.
Well, and if what you're doing is actually what you're doing, then these people are in big trouble and they better step down, right?
Well, again, we're learning this as it's happening because of the reactions. So we're going, okay, this is actually real. This is not some, fantasy thing. We're actually hitting something here because they're running, and it's always top people that ran, never bottom people.
Right.
People you would think are in the know, they are the ones that tend to step down.
Right. Yeah, other people are, they don't have the responsibility. Ultimately, it'll go up to a certain point, and then the person who's aware of it is going to take the consequences, right? Is going to have to pay for.
Yes, but it's more like a knowledge base. People further down the pyramid have only limited knowledge, and so they look at what this paperwork does as it's nonsense, and we hear that a lot.
Yeah.
But when you see the upper people running, you go, no, well, you can think it's nonsense all you want. They don't think so.
Right. And you've seen that ongoing. You've seen that the higher up people who have been read into these things understand exactly
what you're doing, and they know it's very real and more than I did at the time. And the reason why I know it's real is because the reactions that I got over and over and over. So you go, okay, this is like more than real. Like I don't have to even think about it anymore. And so I'm never deterred by letters. There's no basis in law for this. I see that like thousands of times. Mm-hmm. And everybody that does our process, they get those letters. And I just tell them, yep.
It's another one of those claims, right?
I could build a house out of that, of those papers. I got thousands of them.
Yeah.
And yet, top people still run.
Okay, I think this is a good time to take a break. So thanks for that, Cal.